Good morning, everyone. My name is Brijendra Singh, and I'm here on behalf of Vajiram to take up a small discussion on the Civil Services Mains papers for 2021. Specifically, here we'll be taking a look at the ethics paper that was conducted. Part of the discussion I'll be taking up here, and part of the discussion, the second part of the discussion, will be taken up by Mr. Mukul Pathak. I think he needs no introduction. He'll be dealing with part of the questions with me, and some of them I'll take a look at here. Before I start with the discussion, let me first briefly take a look at what exactly this paper was about. By and large, the ethics paper this year was on expected lines. The questions were not very difficult. As always, they asked a few questions which expected you to give examples. And this is what we always say to students who are preparing for the ethics paper, that the better the quality of your examples, the better your answer will seem, the more value, the more marks you will be able to get. Number two, one common complaint that students have had from the mains in 2020 and the mains in 2021 is that when we look at the case studies, they are unusually long. Sometimes there are 350, there are 400, they are 450 words long. Now, one way of looking at it could be to say that the paper is unfair, that the case studies are too long, making the paper very difficult to complete. A slightly better way of looking at it is to understand that if the case is very long, students will take a lot of time to read it. They are already under a time constraint. So now when they start writing, they will write more instinctively. They will not fabricate answers. They will not cook up answers. They will write what they genuinely believe to be true. And this is what we are actually trying to check. That instinctively, what do you understand? Ethics can never be in, it can never be in an artificial environment. It always has to be tested in a real environment. And that real environment, perhaps, the UPSC is creating by giving you very long case studies so that when you write the answer, you write what instinctively, very naturally comes to you. But those case studies we'll take a look at later. Let me start with the discussion over here, and the questions that I will not take up, the questions that are getting left over, you will be able to see in the second part of the video when Mr. Pathak discusses them with you. Now, the very first question given in this paper was question number 1A. Question number 1A says, identify 5 ethical traits on which you can plot the performance of a civil servant. Justify the inclusion of these traits in the matrix. Now, what the matrix is, we'll come to later. The first thing that a student is expected to do in a question of this sort is to remember that there's a distinction between values on the one hand and traits on the other. What are values? Values are motivational variables. Values are those variables that direct your behavior, that guide your behavior, that inspire your behavior. On the other hand, what are traits? Traits, on the other hand, are descriptive variables. What do you mean by descriptive variables? That when an individual practices or follows a certain value for a sustained period of time, that now becomes one of your traits. Your stable behavioral habits are what we refer to as traits. Now, it's not a very correct understanding, but if I wanted to simplify this for you, I would say that your values are in the nature of nouns, your traits are in the nature of adjectives. For example, if I say that there is a value called honesty, a person who practices honesty for a long time is a person we will call honest. If there's a value called compassion, then a person who practices compassion for a long time is a person that we say has the trait of being compassionate. So those are your values and these are your traits. Number 2, if a student is writing an answer, first very briefly tell us that what exactly these traits are. Number 2, when you have to include 5 traits in your answer, which traits will you include? Now, there are many traits. The number of traits that a good civil servant or even a good human being should possess are literally innumerable. You can say that a person should be punctual. You can say that you should be compassionate. You can say that you should be honest. You can say that you should be tolerant. N number of values. However, when you're preparing for an exam as demanding as the civil services, it is very important that you have a stable list of values, stable list of terms, stable list of examples that is available to you. So a very simple way in which you could have given some very standardized traits over here are by picking them up directly from your syllabus. Section 3, which gives you foundation values for a civil servant, these are some values given over there. So what would I expect you to be? I would expect you to be a man or a woman of integrity. I would want you to be impartial. I would want you to be unbiased. I would want a person to be dedicated. I would expect you to be compassionate and so on. If you want, you can take 5 traits from here. And even better, since we're talking about civil servants specifically, an even better option over here is to pick up the 7 principles of public life that were given by the Nolan Committee. What these principles are, I'll just come to in a minute. Now, number 1, you identify 5 traits. Number 2, they're saying justify their inclusion in the matrix. On what basis do you justify them? By telling us whatever are the traits that you're choosing, what is the advantage, what is the benefit, what is the utility of these traits in any matrix that we use. This now comes to the second part of the question. A student ordinarily should have the question, what exactly is this matrix? Now you can take a look at Britain and use what they call a competence matrix. You can use what we call a performance matrix. Or if you've been reading your newspapers carefully, you would have known that India has initiated something called Mission Karam Yogi. And in Mission Karam Yogi, we specifically specified an engagement matrix. Traits, characteristics, values, behaviors, which we believe are important for assessing and for understanding which civil servants can be deputed for which tasks. How you do that, I'll come to in a couple of minutes. But first, let me take a look at what traits ideally we can choose. Now, if I use the Nolan Committee, they have 7 principles given. Out of these 7 principles, we choose 5 of them and we phrase them in the form of a trait. For example, the first principle that the Nolan Committee talks about is selflessness. Now, if I want a person or if I want a civil servant who practices selflessness, I will say that this person should be selfless. What do you mean by selfless? A person who always, or a civil servant who always places public welfare, his official duties at first priority. What is the advantage of having a person who's selfless? That number 1, this will ensure that your actions are completely, solely in public interest. Number 2, it will control any tendency to only promote self-interest. Number 3, it will promote courage. It will inspire a spirit of service. It will make people dedicated to the work, to the task that they've been assigned. So very briefly, mention the trait that you believe is important and simultaneously give maybe 1, maybe 2 justifications for that. In the limited word limit that you have, even 2 justifications per trait will be more than enough. Similarly, another trait is the trait of integrity, that we would want men and women of integrity who have integrity to be civil servants. What is the advantage of integrity? It helps you avoid nepotism or favoritism, helps you avoid a conflict of interest, makes you immune to any pressure, any external influence, any demands that are raised upon you. Number 3, a civil servant, ideally, we would expect that they are objective. What do you mean by objective? That a civil servant must have the ability to take a decision based on the merit of the situation rather than taking a decision which is governed or which is influenced by external factors. What is the advantage of being objective? It ensures fairness and impartiality in your decisions. Number 2, it promotes a recognition, a genuine appreciation of merit. Number 3, it overcomes any discrimination, any bias, any prejudices that you may have. This ensures that you will treat everyone in an impartial, objective and fair manner. Similarly, number 4, every civil servant must have the trait of accountability. Accountable to whom? Accountable to the people that he or she is expected to serve, either directly in the form of social accountability or indirectly by being accountable to his superiors. This ensures that any work that you're doing is citizen-centric. Number 2, it promotes social accountability. Number 3, it ensures that you are responsive to the changing needs, to the changing aspirations, to the changing problems of the people. One more trait that we can add over here is openness. What is openness? That as far as possible, a civil servant must have the ability to proactively share information with the people. Whenever he withholds information, the intention behind withholding it should be to promote rather than to constrain, rather than to compromise public welfare. What is the advantage if you have open bureaucrats? That this will promote better information sharing, greater transparency. Number 2, it will make citizens more aware about their rights, about their entitlements. And this awareness, number 3, will promote better civic engagement, better citizen participation. So in the first part of your answer, First, very briefly, tell us the distinction between traits and values. Number two, identify any 5 traits that you believe are important. For example, here 5 that we are taking from the Nolan Committee. Now, for your understanding, because students still will say, what exactly was that matrix that we are talking about? Let's say on the basis of these 5 traits, I as an individual want to assess 3 people, 3 civil servants. Let's say they are A, B and C. There are 5 traits that we have. The person should be selfless, must have integrity, must be objective, accountable and open. What is the purpose of creating a matrix? Whether it is a competence matrix, whether it is a performance matrix, what is the purpose of creating it? The purpose of creating a matrix is to introduce, to the extent that it is possible, to introduce objectivity in our assessment. That in a standardized, uniform manner, we can assess people and then determine who would be the best suited to perform a certain task. Now, while we are trying to introduce objectivity, a certain degree of subjectivity is inescapable. Why? Because even if I want to assess them, that is my personal opinion, that is my subjective opinion on who ranks or who rates at what level. For example, if I take a look at selflessness, that a person performs his duties focusing only on public welfare, I give A 8 out of 10, I give B 7 out of 10, and I give C 6 out of 10. Now, if I look at only one characteristic, then A seems to be the best, B is the second best, and C is the last. However, if I take a look at 5 traits and I assess all of them on my subjective opinion, I assess them. I give A, for example, integrity, I rate them as 7, 9 and 8. On the basis of objectivity, I rate them as 6, 7 and 7 and so on. There's a certain bit of subjectivity that is entering, that is creeping in. However, now when you take a look at their final scores, the best person seems to be B. The second best person turns out to be C, and A is the lowest performer. So if I had to choose one of them for an important project, for a critical task, I would prefer choosing B because he has the best combination of all the traits we seek in a good civil servant. First. Second, while you on the whole may have the best combination of all these traits, there are certain traits that are more important for one set of tasks. There is another set of traits that may be important for another set of tasks. There now, what do? The same engagement matrix that India is experimenting with, the same performance matrix that the UK has already initiated, what do? We add weights to them. Now, this is not something that you write in the exam, but this is the matrix because next year, they could always ask you, how will you assess or how will you assign different people for different tasks? Now, these are the assessments that we already had, but there are 2 different tasks that I have to assign. Number 1, I need to send 2 people to maintain law and order, 2 civil servants, 2 bureaucrats to maintain law and order in a disturbed area. Or the second task, I need to send 2 people to create a master plan for a new airport or maybe a new special economic zone. On what basis do I make this choice? Again, if I want to make it objectively, I will just add weights. For example, what do you mean by weights? Relative importance, relative priority. If I'm sending someone to maintain law and order, the most important trait in that person that I would seek is selflessness. The person should be courageous. The person should be dedicated. The person should not shy away, should not fear any problems, any risks that he faces in the performance of his duties. So I give selflessness a weight of 5. Second most important trait over here is accountability. That when he's taking any decision, for example, he authorizes the use of fire, he authorizes the use of lathi charge, he authorizes the use of water cannons. In all these actions, he must hold himself accountable to his superiors as well as to the people. So I assign this a weight of 4. We assign objectivity a weight of 3 and so on. Now, when I assign these weights and now when I calculate how these 3 people are performing, person A gets a score of 100, person B gets a score of 111 and person C gets a score of 99. So if I had to assign 2 of these people for this task, I would prefer to choose A and B because for this particular task, they are the 2 people who are best suited. But if the nature of the task changes, then the nature of the weights or the assignment of the weights will also change. For example, If I want you to plan a master plan, to develop a master plan for a new airport, what is absolutely important, what is most important, is that you are a man or a woman of integrity. That when you have access to this kind of confidential, sensitive information, you do not share it with anyone. You try to avoid, consciously avoid any conflict of interest. You do not share information with people who are likely to benefit from it at the expense of common public welfare. So here, the most important trait that I'm looking for is integrity. Beyond that, number 2 is selflessness. Number 3, objectivity, and so on. When I assign these weights, so integrity gets a weight of 5, selflessness gets a weight of 4, objectivity gets a weight of 3, and so on. Now when we calculate the scores, the highest scorer again is B, but this time the second highest scorer is not A, but C. So if I had to send 2 people for this task, I would choose A and B. But if I had to choose 2 people to develop a new master plan, I would choose B and C. On the basis of these traits, we are deciding how to assess the performance or even the suitability of a civil servant for any given task. That is question number 1, part A.
Question number 1 first, the B part. Now the question is, identify 10 essential values that are needed to be an effective public servant. Describe the ways and the means to prevent non-ethical behavior in the public servants. Now the 10 values that are needed to be effective, that are needed to be an effective public servant are: number 1, courage; number 2, fairness and justice; number 3, integrity; number 4, impartiality and neutrality; number 5, objectivity; number 6, responsiveness and openness; number 7, dedication to work; number 8, tolerance and patience; number 9, accountability; and number 10, empathy and compassion. Now let us take the second part of the question: how can we prevent non-ethical behavior in public servants? Now these are some of the things that we can do. Number 1, budding public servants must be exposed to exemplary role models who possess highest levels of integrity. Number 2, use of human management strategies, human resource management strategies to be more specific, that facilitate performance and merit-based promotion, effective personnel selection and training procedures, anti-discrimination protection, etc. Now the third is whistleblower protection laws to protect appropriate public interest disclosures of wrongdoing by the officials. Number 4, creation of pathways that give citizens relevant tools to engage and participate in their government. Number 5, put external and internal complaint and grievance redressal procedures in place. Number 6, effective laws which require civil servants to give reasons for their official decisions. Number 7, removing the red tape by bringing together formal and informal processes, simplification of cumbersome procedures and single window provisions. Next, use of technology to bring about disintermediation, that is the removal of intermediaries, free flow of information, improved surveillance over officials in sensitive positions, and use of technology to build dynamic exchanges between stakeholders such as citizens, civil societies, media, government, etc. And last but not the least, oath of office and solemn declaration. So this is the end to the question number 1B.
Next question that we look at is question number 2A. Question number 2A is probably the only question in your paper which was slightly outside, which can be considered slightly outside the direct dimensions of your syllabus. Question number 2A says, the impact of digital technology as a reliable source of input for rational decision making is a debatable issue. Critically evaluate this statement with an example. Now, when I use the word debatable, when I use the word critically evaluate, it means that you're expected to discuss the advantages as well as the disadvantages, the pros and cons of any such issue. How do you frame your answer over here? Number 1, begin by telling us what exactly are the elements involved in rational decision making. In rational decision making, for taking a good rational decision, what do I need? Number 1, I need to collect data and information from different sources, from multiple sources. Number 2, I need to filter relevant information from the irrelevant information. Very selectively choose which information is relevant for the decision that I'm taking. Number 3, I need to analyze and process this information. How do you process the information? By undertaking a cost-benefit analysis, by undertaking a risk-benefit analysis, by weighing the merits and demerits of different alternatives. And fourth, finally, based on the analysis that you've undertaken, now choose the best possible alternative. The problem, if I do this, I will be able to take a decision which can be considered rational, logical, sensible. Problem, however, is that if I try to do this, we want to take a rational decision, but there are always limits, there are always boundaries to our rationality. Herbert Simon, the Nobel Prize winner, had given the concept of bounded rationality. What is bounded rationality? That as human beings, there are limits to what we can do. If I want to collect information beyond a certain point, I cannot do that. If I want to process information beyond a certain point, I cannot do that. If you give me 7 alternatives in a very logical, in a purely rational manner, I may not be able to assess which is the best decision to take. Even if I try to do that, the investment in terms of time, in terms of effort, in terms of cost may be extremely high. Here, to help us overcome the limitations, the boundaries of our rationality, this is where now we can use digital technology. What is the advantage of digital technology? And this now becomes the second part of your answer. The advantages of digital technology are that number 1, it can help us sort, it can help us process, it can help us analyze massive amounts of data. Number 2, with very little effort. Number 2, it can significantly reduce human error. Number 3, it brings greater objectivity in understanding and processing this information. For example, if you consider the field of research and development, we are still living at a time when there's a global pandemic going on. Now, I need to invest, I need to develop newer vaccines, I need to develop newer medicines, I need to develop newer medical interventions. Normally, a pharmaceutical company would do that by conducting multiple experiments. But here, there's a very high cost involved in the trial and error. How do I reduce the time? How do I reduce these costs? Very simply by using digital technology. Similarly, if you consider the issue of personalized healthcare, in personalized healthcare, what do I want? That any medical practitioner, any doctor who's giving us healthcare, who's assisting us with our treatment, should give us a treatment option which is best suited for the individual. So in India, what form does this take? This, for example, in our country takes the form of digitization of health records. That is what the government is working on currently. What is digitization of health records? That using digital technology for every single individual, for every single patient especially, we will put all their digital records in one common database. When this person needs medical treatment, the doctor on duty can very easily access those health records, can understand this patient's history, and can use all available medical knowledge to arrive at a decision that is best suited for this person. These kind of interventions would be especially useful when you consider, for any calamity, any problem, when you consider the golden hour. What is the golden hour? The first 1 hour after an accident happens. In the golden hour or in the first hour after an accident happens, if a person is given timely and correct medical assistance, the chances of fatalities, the chances of greater problems are reduced by a factor of almost half. The chances that a person will have to suffer beyond a certain point will be significantly reduced. And how is that made possible? Again, by the use of digital technology. Similarly, if you want to extend its use, you can even consider the use of digital technology in criminal justice systems. How do you use it there? Because all relevant factors that are pertinent, that are relevant for a particular case, can be already factored in. These factors can be used to arrive at the most rational, at the best possible decision, the best possible verdict, which will not have the kind of bias, which will not have the kind of subjectivity that a human verdict may have. In 2021, there were a few judgments that were given by different courts in India which were considered somewhat irrational, sometimes even surprising and shocking. For example, in January 2021, there was a verdict given by the Bombay High Court, which said that a man who was accused of molesting a young girl should not be considered guilty under the POCSO Act for the very simple reason that there was no skin-to-skin contact. But by that argument, any man, if he wears a pair of gloves, should be able to touch any woman wherever he wants. Why was the verdict surprising? Because there must have been some bias that came in, possibly even the direct misuse of judicial authority. This kind of arbitrariness, this kind of misuse of discretion can be significantly reduced. The subjectivity can be reduced, again, by using digital technology. If you look at, again, how does it assist rational decision making? For example, in the case of finance, if I as a bank want to assess which borrowers I should give money to, or if I as a borrower want to assess which bank would be safest to borrow from, my decision making, the processing of information, the sorting of alternatives to a large extent can be facilitated, can be enhanced by using digital technology. Now, when we're looking at these points, we are only looking at the advantages so far. But again, the question said, critically evaluate the fact that this statement, the use of digital technology, is a debatable issue. When we say it is a debatable issue, you'll also have to take a look at the disadvantages, the cons of using digital technology. Now, where does the reliability of these kind of inputs become a little problematic? Number one, the fact that digital technology or using it as a tool for decision making is always subject to discriminatory outcomes. Why is it subject to discriminatory outcomes? Because the manner in which I design the tool, the manner in which I design an algorithm, the manner in which I design a particular platform, that may always have a bias that is embedded or inserted into it. What do you mean by a bias? A bias could be political, a bias could be ideological, a bias could be cultural, a bias could be based on gender and so on. For example, very commonly, especially when you take a look at the internet, you will find a bias that is embedded into most search engines, which is discriminatory against women. If you do a small Google search right now, on Google, just write two words, schoolboy, and search for the images that you see. When you search for images of a schoolboy, it will show you small boys wearing school uniforms, wearing ties, wearing shorts, carrying bags and so on. It shows you a typical student, small child, 8 years, 10 years old, who's going to school or is ready for school. Unfortunately, in the same search, just change the last word. Instead of searching for a schoolboy, search for a schoolgirl. When you type schoolgirls, again, you'll see images of some girls. But many of the images that you'll be given will show you women, adult women, grown-up women wearing school uniforms in a very provocative, in a very sensual manner. This is what you call reinforcing the commodification or the objectification of women. And why is this happening? Because there's a bias embedded into the search engine itself, that women would be portrayed in a manner that is derogatory or at least discriminatory. Number two, digital technology is of course highly objective, but being highly objective, it can also reinforce stereotypes. How does it reinforce stereotypes? Because it shows you only the numbers. It does not reveal what leads to those numbers. There's a very famous quote that statistics reveal as much as they conceal. What does that mean? I am a bank which is considering expanding my lending program. I want to lend to more and more people, but I want to be assured that whoever I'm lending money to has the potential to return that money back, has the potential to give me back my investment. Now, what I do is that I create a platform where I try to assess what is the probability that my loans will be returned to me. And here I realize that the maximum amount of defaults occur when loans are given to marginalized sections. What are marginalized sections? For example, most commonly women. In a country such as India, women have a very high attrition rate when it comes to jobs. Women are are usually the gender which are asked to give up their jobs whenever there are any domestic problems. For them, getting access to work, getting access to household decisions, getting access to the household budget, household finances is relatively difficult compared to the male population. So when I consider the default rate for men as compared to women, I realize that usually women have more defaults, have a higher probability of not returning the loans. Why? Because digital technology now is only giving me the numbers. It is not considering the human aspect, the social aspect, the emotional aspect. Number three, again, if I want to use digital technology for rational decision making, one major problem that an individual will face is an information overload. In fact, when you look at students preparing for the civil services exam, many of you today are at a disadvantage, not because you don't have information, but because there's an information overload. Whether you want to prepare for your optional, whether you want to prepare for a certain GS subject, whether you want to learn how to write answers better, which book to use, there are innumerable options and there are countless pieces of advice that you're given. In these circumstances, what is the disadvantage of digital technology? That it can be used to create pre-selected defaults. What do you mean by a selected default? I want to find out which is a good book to read for, let's say, history. So I just type best book for history for the civil services exam. How many results will it show me? Let's say it shows me 72,000 results. But on the first page, it will show me only 10. Then another 10 on the second page, on the third page, and so on. How many people will make the effort of shifting from the first page to the second or from the second to the third? Very few. With every successive page of a search engine result, the chances that a person will go to the second or the third or the fourth page start reducing drastically. Which is why, what are you doing? Essentially, you're using these pre-selected defaults to manipulate the user's decision. There's a high probability that whatever are the first 3 results or the first 5 search results that are shown, the user will invariably make a choice out of these 3 or out of these 5, whether or not they are good. Which is why companies spend a lot of money on search engine optimization to ensure that algorithms are made in such a manner that their name or their product is portrayed on the very first page. This is where, again, digital technology is not very reliable for good, effective, rational decision making. Number 4, with digital technology, the information on the basis of which we are taking a decision, the reliability of that information itself, we are not really sure. For example, self-medication when a person is not feeling well. For most people who develop an illness or at least develop some symptoms which tell them that they are ill, before they approach a doctor, they usually try to find out the problem by themselves. For that, they will use digital technology. They will adhere to self-medication. If they cannot cure themselves, then they seek professional help in the form of a doctor. But since most of the content here may be user-generated, the reliability of that information, we are not really sure. And since we are not sure, there is always a possibility that instead of curing yourself, you may further aggravate the problem. That is not a very rational decision to take. 5th and finally, the focus of digital technology, the focus of these tools is largely quantitative. It is not qualitative. What do you mean by quantitative? Something that is countable, something that is measurable. Digital technology can help you take decisions largely by focusing on numbers, by focusing on measurable criteria. It cannot consider the qualitative aspects. For instance, if I look at educational outreach using digital tools, how do you understand this? If you want to give an example for this, in March 2020, India went into lockdown. When we went into lockdown, one section of people who were very strongly affected were students studying in schools or even in colleges. Now, let's say you are a civil servant posted in some part of the country. Under your jurisdiction, there are, let's say, 25,000 students. Let's say all of them are school students. You are given the task of ensuring that their education is not interrupted. So what do? You go to all the teachers concerned and you instruct the teachers to make videos for all the lectures that they are still expected to provide to the students. The videos are made and now you want to extend them to the students. What do? You use again digital technology, a very simple option. You say that we will send all these videos to the respective students using their mobile numbers, the registered mobile numbers through, let's say, WhatsApp. The videos are sent. How many videos have you sent? 25,000 students have got these videos. Problem, however, is now, let's say you assess this after a month and you realize that out of these 25,000 videos that you sent across, 20,000 of the videos have been downloaded and have been viewed. So what is your reach? 80%. Now very confidently you can say 80% of the students, their education was not interrupted. And that is a reason to rejoice because the largest section of your jurisdiction you've been able to reach. Problem, however, is that many of these students may have never even seen that video, may not even know that the video was sent. Because for many households, there might be only one cell phone that they have. That one mobile phone may be owned by the father, may be owned by the mother, who may have to go out for work, who may have seen the video but not shown it to the child, and so on. In these circumstances, the actual percentage of children who are able to view the videos may be significantly lower. And yet, you as a civil servant will not feel the urgency, will not feel the need to reach out to those people. Why? Because digital technology is giving you a very different picture. Which is why it may not be the best tool for rational decision making. In this question again, number one, explain to us how exactly a person can take a rational decision. Number two, tell us the advantages of using digital technology. And third, finally, also tell us where the use of digital technology may impair rather than improve decision making. Question number 2B that was given to you was a relatively simple question. Similar topics or similar concepts have been asked many times in the past also. It says that besides domain knowledge, a public official should also have innovativeness and creativity of a high order while resolving ethical dilemmas. Discuss with a suitable example. Now, in this question, the first part, the example will come later. In the first part, there are three things that you need to explain. And of the three things, three issues that you have to explain, the most important is an ethical dilemma. What is an ethical dilemma? An ethical dilemma is a situation in which a person is compelled to make a choice between two alternatives that are equally desirable or equally undesirable. It is not a choice between two alternatives that are significantly different. Both of them are equally right or are equally wrong. In such a case, no matter what decision you take, no matter what choice you make, some principle or some value will end up getting compromised. Therefore, to minimize the damages, to minimize this compromise, it is very important that civil servants possess two criteria. Number one, they must have knowledge regarding their respective domains. And number two, they must be able to think out of the box. They must be innovative. They must be creative. What is domain knowledge? A correct understanding of the environment in which you are operating and the different variables that are involved in that environment. For example, when you people are assigned to a certain cadre, the culture of the state, the language of the state, the traditions, the political environment, the social issues that are likely to come up. That is what you call your domain knowledge. On the other hand, you must have innovation, you must have creativity. What is creativity? The willingness to think out of the box, the willingness to take an initiative, the willingness to take a risk, to change, to challenge at least the prevailing status quo. This is what you explain in the first part of your answer, that to minimize the compromise in an ethical dilemma, domain knowledge and creativity are very important. However, again, as we always say in ethics, the quality of your answer will depend upon the quality of your example. So now, very briefly, add a small example. Explain in it, number one, what is the dilemma? Number two, what is the domain knowledge that you possess? And number three, how you are supplementing that by using a little bit of creativity, a little bit of innovativeness. How do you do that? For example, many examples can be given here. A couple of them let me look at with you. Let's say we want to provide better road infrastructure to people across the country. Now, for better road infrastructure, I need to construct highways. But the government has a limited capacity to spend. So what do? For this highway construction, we encourage public-private partnerships. We ask private companies to build, to assist the government in constructing these highways. The concern still is, if a private company constructs a highway, how will it recover its investment? How will it recover its cost? For this, what do? We ask these private companies to collect toll from citizens who are using those highways. And suddenly, all of a sudden, you will have toll plazas coming across the country, toll booths set up across the country. What are they used for? They are used for, for financing the cost of the construction. But on the one hand is the cost of finance, is the financing of the cost. On the other hand also is the issue of public convenience. Because wherever these toll booths are set up, you will find long lines, you will find long queues, you will find traffic jams where public time, public money, public fuel is being wasted. So for now, there is a dilemma. On the one hand is the financing of those costs, and on the other hand is maintaining public convenience. How do you resolve that? If I try to ensure the financing, public convenience is compromised. If I ensure public convenience, I'll have to demolish these booths, in which case I will not be able to finance. Little bit of innovativeness, little bit of creativity, and what is the response that you give? Introducing FASTags. FASTags now ensure that in a very uniform, in a very standardized manner, every single company will be able to charge the people who are using the roads, and at the same time, there will be no queues, there will be no traffic jams, because all that people have to do is drive through the toll plaza. What have you done? Use a little bit of creativity to resolve a dilemma that you were facing. But if I carry on with the same example, for the same highway construction, we introduced FASTags. When we introduce FASTags, what is the problem that we face? What have you done? You've automated the process. The problem that you're facing is that this will take a direct toll on employment. A lot of people who are employed at these plazas and the families that are dependent upon them will not have a means of livelihood. On the one hand is introducing automation to ensure that we can address the first dilemma. On the other hand is ensuring the employment and the social welfare of a large number of people in the country. What is the resolution that you give? Recognizing that even when you introduce FASTags, there will be a new economic ecosystem that you're creating. In this ecosystem, you will need people to develop the FASTags, you will need people to sell the FASTags, you will need people to be able to regularly maintain and service the infrastructure that is required. So the people who are losing their jobs, what can you do? You can give them reskilling, you can ensure upskilling, you can give them better training and absorb them in a newer, even a more productive capacity. Again, what are you doing? Using a little bit of creativity to address a dilemma that you are facing. Another example, if you want to add, and any of these examples, any one of them is what you can choose for your answer. Another issue is the issue of energy security. Now, if I want to ensure that India has energy security, I not only want energy, I can burn fuel, I can burn coal, I can burn fossil fuels, but that is not what we want. Ideally, what we would want is clean energy, for example, solar power. But if I want to ensure more usage or more reliance on solar power in the country, the first problem that I face is acquisition of land. If I want to set up solar panels, if I want to set up solar farms, I will first have to acquire a lot of land on which this infrastructure can be planted. So on the one hand is my desire to promote the use of clean energy. On the other hand is the economic viability of the plan. Why economic viability? Because this now will significantly increase the cost involved in the project. How do you resolve this dilemma? You resolve the dilemma, for example, and a living example from India is the Narmada River canals and the solar panels, the solar projects that have been set on top of these canals. For I don't remember the figure exactly, I think about 530 kilometers of canals. What will they have? They will have solar panels. What does this do? With solar panels, you are developing cleaner energy, you're getting cleaner energy, but number two, the economic costs have reduced significantly. Why? Number one, there is no need to acquire land. Number two, most of the civil work is significantly reduced because the weight of the panels is put on the two banks of the river itself. What did you do? A little bit of creativity to address a dilemma that you are facing, and so on and so forth. If you look at the hospitality industry, let me briefly discuss these also then. If I look at the hospitality industry, especially after the lockdown was announced in 2020, a lot of hotels, a lot of restaurants, a lot of dhabas have not been able to function because first, people were not allowed to go out, and second, people are not comfortable going out. But if these units have to maintain their sustainability, have to stay economically viable, they must be able to serve the people, at least deliver food to them. But if I, as a restaurant owner, want to deliver food, the dilemma that I face is my survival on the one hand and economic sustainability on the other. Why is environmental sustainability? Why is that a concern? Because if I want to pack food and send it to you, this will significantly increase the use of single-use plastics. Here, what innovation can you introduce? For example, edible cutlery. For example, organic packaging. A lot of units in India, for example, now have started using banana leaves for packing. What are you doing? You are maintaining your economic survival, but also ensuring that your habits, your practices are environmentally responsible, environmentally sustainable. And fifth, finally, is the issue of healthcare. In healthcare, there's a small example from the state of Chhattisgarh. The dilemma that was being faced over there was giving timely medical care to the people. The problem, however, was geographical feasibility. In Chhattisgarh, there were regions which were geographically very difficult to cover. Now, I have two options. Let's say this is my jurisdiction. This is a healthcare center that I have, and people living are scattered all across the place. If I want to give them timely medical assistance, I cannot reach them with an ambulance. Why? Because number one, the roads are not very good. Or number two, where the roads are available, it takes a lot of time, the distance is very long. What did the district administration there introduce? They introduced bike ambulances. The same medical care can be provided to them regardless of the geographical differences, and this has reduced the cost of patient treatment by a factor of almost 90%. One wonders, even in a city like Delhi, in Delhi you have good roads. The geographic aspect is not a concern. The problem in cities like Delhi is the traffic. But in this traffic, the movement of cars and ambulances may be difficult. The movement of bikes is significantly easier. You cannot use it for all medical emergencies, but to a large extent, you can still reach out to your people. This is why we say that in ethical dilemmas, a little bit of domain knowledge, a little bit of creativity can go a long way in providing you with an effective resolution.
We start with question number 3, which has 3 quotations in it. The first quotation is by Swami Vivekananda, and it says that every work has to pass through hundreds of difficulties before succeeding. After full stop, those who persevere will see the light sooner or later. Now, every work has to pass through hundreds of difficulties before succeeding basically implies that performance of any individual is the result of motivation and ability. It is a multiplicative function of motivation and ability, with motivation being nothing but perseverance. Now, what the import of this statement by Swami Vivekananda is that those people who persevere will be able to learn from their failures. They'll be able to learn from their failures. And those who persevere over time may get enough insights to solve the problems confronting them effectively. In fact, every work has to pass through rejection, ridicule, and opposition before finding acceptance. And only people with high level of perseverance can go through these stages before being able to find acceptance. The outstanding example of perseverance is presented by the great inventor Edison, who has approximately 1100 patents to his name. One of the famous statements made by Edison was that I have not failed. I have just found 10,000 ways it won't work. This statement clearly indicates that Edison failed many times, but failure after failure did not disappoint him. In fact, it only strengthened his resolve to be successful. And eventually he became probably the most successful inventor in the history of mankind. Edison never had an easy and a predictable path towards greatness. He had humble beginnings, being born as the last of 7 children to a school teacher. A childhood malady left him with the loss of hearing in both his ears, and he was a hyperactive, distraction-prone child who was pulled out of the public school at the age of 12. And even with these limitations, he produced so many things that we have every reason to thank him for, and never a day goes by in our lives when we don't have to thank Edison for many tools and conveniences of modern life. So this shows how important it is to keep persevering in the light of adversities, and only those who have learned to thrive in adversities have the taste of success. Now we go to statement number 2, quotation number 2, that is 3b, which says, we can never obtain peace in the outer world unless and until we have peace with ourselves. Now the question is, what is peace? The answer is, peace is a state of tranquility that the individual achieves when various parts of self are integrated. When various parts of his self are integrated, it is the mental state of tranquility that the individual achieves, and this is called as peace. Peace is possible only when individual has overcome his fixations and obsessions and is therefore on his way to realize his true self. Only when the person has ego integrity, he is able to overcome the various negative emotions of hate, jealousy, greed, contempt, fear that are inside him, and he makes the world a better place to live in. The reason why there is so much of unrest in the world is that people are guided by deep sense of insecurity, and this is because they lack peace inside. They are locked in an incessant struggle to occupy more and more, and as a result of that, sustainable development becomes a casualty. Only when we have peace inside, our materialistic strivings would amicably be balanced with our spiritual striving, and we will avoid life of indulgences and adopt in letter and spirit the ideas of all inclusive and sustainable development. Peace inside will allow individuals to operate without an element of mistrust, distrust, misunderstanding, contempt, and when individuals shall operate like this, the world shall become a better place to live. Intergroup, international relations will improve if the individuals making up these groups have peace inside. That is why Dalai Lama's statement has great relevance in contemporary times. Now we take up the third question here, the C part of the third question, and that is a statement by Erikson which says, life does not make any sense without interdependence. We need each other and sooner we learn that, the better it is for all of us. Now the first question here is, what is interdependence? Interdependence is the dependence of two or more people or things on each other. Erikson's statement that life does not make any sense without interdependence is a perfect statement, because we live in a connected world. No man is an island. Man is a social animal. Though we are taught about the importance of being individuals and being responsible for our actions, but our life experiences involve others. Success and failures at workplaces, families, schools are determined by how well we are able to work with other people. So the key to happiness and success lies in utilizing the potential of each being, and that requires a kind of a positive interdependence. The best embodiment of Erikson's statement can be seen in the form of the functioning of human body. Heart has its own function and so has kidney, but heart and kidney cannot operate without cooperation with other vital organs in the body, and together they make human beings an effective unit. The value of interdependence can be judged in the present times even more, as we live in a globalized world where everything is interconnected and interdependent. When global supply chains are broken, it affects all the nations. COVID times taught us very effectively the importance of interdependence. It was only a story of human positive interdependence, of which India was also the part in the form of vaccine, Maitri and other things, that we were able to fight the COVID disease very successfully. So therefore, there is a lot of merit in the statement made by Erik Erikson. Now we go to question number 4, and it says, attitude is an important component that goes as an input in the development of human being. How to build suitable attitude needed for a public servant? Now the question is, what is an attitude? So attitudes are the lasting evaluations of various aspects of social world. There are many ways in which attitudes contribute to human development. Attitude influence our goal setting and as well as our motivation to reach our goals. Attitudes influence the kind of adjustments we make in our life. Positive attitude facilitates better adjustment in our professional and personal life. Attitudes decide how we harness our potential to reach various developmental milestones. Attitudes influence our expectations from the world around us. And a more positive and a realistic attitude will mean we will generate realistic expectations, which in turn fosters well-being. Our attitudes influence the resilience and the commitments and as well as the competence that we demonstrate to meet the challenges that the world around us presents to us. Now, the next part of the question is how to build a suitable attitude needed for public servants. So, this can be done by informing the public servants about the challenges associated with their roles and educate them about how they have to perform their roles. They can be exposed to desirable role models so that they can learn by observation. By providing civil servants and public servants with the punishment for wrongdoing and a reward for socially desirable and ethical behavior, we can create in them a commitment towards the people and as well as towards the job entrusted to them. Further, constructive feedback can also help them improve their performance by developing positive attitudes and relevant attitudes. Likewise, training programs for capacity building, inculcating in them habit of self-examination, training them to develop social cues, rapport building, and as well as techniques and tools for observing self-restraint and self-control can help develop in them attitudes which will make them more effective public servants.
Next question that we consider is question number 4B. Question number 4B says that in a crisis of conscience, emotional intelligence can help us to overcome these crises without compromising on the ethical and moral stand that you're likely to take. If that is the case, then critically examine the statement. Now, in this question, what do? Number one, you begin first by explaining what is a crisis of conscience. What is a crisis of conscience? A crisis of conscience is a situation where an individual's sense of morality is trapped between different and competing values. Or a crisis of conscience can occur when individual morality is different from the collective morality of others. What does that mean? For example, you are an individual. Within you, there are two different values, there are two different principles, there are two different duties, and you cannot clearly understand which of these duties you should give priority to. For instance, there's a person whose parent is in a coma. Keeping the parent alive will require a lot of medical expenses. It will significantly increase the cost, the financial burden upon the family. On the other hand, this person also has a child or maybe two children. As the medical costs of the parent's treatment start increasing, the future of the child may be compromised, may be in jeopardy. Their opportunities in terms of fees, in terms of education opportunities, in case of even transportation opportunities will significantly start reducing. What is the crisis for this person? On the one hand is his duty towards his parent. On the other hand is his duty towards his child. If he chooses one, the second will be compromised. Put a person in a situation like this and it will create a very strong moral crisis, very strong crisis of conscience for any such individual. Number one. Number two, now this is when your individual morality is trapped between competing values. On the other hand, the individual sense of morality may be different from the collective morality of others. What does that mean? That means that what you as an individual believe to be morally right, others around you on a collective basis may not agree with that assessment. For instance, you are a person, you are an individual who believes that the death penalty, capital punishment, is morally not justified. Why is it not justified? You believe that if the government does not have the authority to give you your life, it should not enjoy the authority to take your life away. You believe that you can send a person to prison for the remainder of his natural life, but certainly you should not execute that person. But that is your individual sense of morality. On the other hand, others around you may not agree with that. In India, for example, the collective morality of the country is such that in India, capital punishment is allowed by law. In the rarest of rare cases, in the most heinous of crimes, the most serious of crimes, we can award the death penalty. So here now, if I say that you are a person who's a police officer, and over here is the nation, I ask you to arrest a person, you know that if this person is arrested, he will certainly be executed. Your morality is different from the morality of others. This will now create a moral crisis or a crisis of conscience for you. In these circumstances, wherever such a moral crisis arises, what will you face? You will face, and let me just erase this first. Whenever such a moral crisis arises, what will you face? You will face what we call an emotional upheaval. What is an emotional upheaval? That you now will find it very difficult to be able to control your emotions. Negative emotions will overwhelm you, will overpower you, and may even affect the decision that you're likely to take. In these circumstances, how do I handle such a crisis of conscience? For that, I use a simple tool called emotional intelligence. What is emotional intelligence? Emotional intelligence, very simply, can be defined as the ability to recognize your own emotions as well as the emotions of others, and to use this understanding, to use this information to help you guide your behavior, guide your decisions. There's a very, what should I call him? There's a very famous author, very famous psychologist by the name of Daniel Goleman. Daniel Goleman says, and he's, I think, one of the preeminent authorities on emotional intelligence. He says that emotional intelligence has 5 basic elements. Number 1, self-awareness. Number 2, self-regulation. Number 3, motivation. Number 4, empathy. And number 5, finally, social skills. Using these 5 elements, a person can not only improve their emotional intelligence, but can also use that emotional intelligence, also use these tools to guide their behavior to take better decisions, to not let negative emotions overpower them in any situation, any decision. For example, if I take a look at, now we have to critically examine the statement. So how do you do that? Take one of these examples, maximum 2. More than that, you will not have space to write in the exam. But let's say an issue that we are facing is a situation of tax evasion. There is an individual who's wondering whether he should pay the taxes or he should not. What is the crisis? On the one hand, is the financial benefit for himself if he does not pay his taxes honestly. On the other hand, is nation building. Because if he pays the taxes honestly, the advantage goes to the entire country. Government gets more revenue, they spend it upon the people, and everyone prospers. Now here, what emotional intelligence tool should you use? Self-awareness. By realizing that the benefit that you're getting by evading taxes will be compromised because the same money that you're saving by not paying your tax honestly, you'll have to spend on some facility or the other, which at the moment the government is not providing you. For instance, the quality of public hospitals in India is not really very good. There's significant scope for improvement. But if I ask the government to improve it, the government will say that at the moment we have very limited ability, we have very limited financial resources. So if an individual does not pay his taxes honestly, over a period of time, what happens? Whenever he needs or his family members need medical treatment, he will have to rely on private hospitals, which significantly increase the cost that is involved. This awareness now helps you understand that tax compliance benefits not only you, but even others around you. Another situation that we can consider is a person who's asked to interview a family member. You're conducting interviews and one of the candidates is your own family member. What is the crisis here? The crisis over here is, on the one hand, is the personal benefit of ensuring this person's selection. On the other hand, is the professional duty of choosing the best candidate, of conducting a fair interview. What is a fair interview? That there should be no conflict of interest. There should also be no suspicion of a conflict of interest. Here, what tool do you use? Self-regulation. If you are the interviewer, the final decision rests with you. And if you're able to regulate yourself, what resolution do you give? You say that I will recuse myself from the interview. I will not take the interview myself. Another situation we can consider, which in fact we are facing in India for quite some time, is vaccine hesitancy. A lot of people in the country are not willing to get vaccinated. They're very stubbornly saying that we are not going to get vaccinated. It is our right to refuse such vaccination. What is the crisis over here? On the one hand is the personal choice of the person refusing the vaccine. On the other side is the health of the individual. If you're a civil servant over here, what tool would I expect you to use? Motivation. What is the response that comes from this motivation? Persistent and innovative efforts to reduce this vaccine hesitancy, to encourage people to come forward and get vaccinated. So again, depending upon the situation, depending upon the crisis, any of these elements, any of these tools can be used to help us arrive at an effective resolution. One case study that the UPSC asked 2-3 years back, we can use that as an example. You are a civil servant. An old, destitute woman comes to you. She wants some benefits under some government welfare scheme. But at the moment, she does not have any documentation, does not have any paperwork through which she can prove her eligibility for the scheme. What is the dilemma? What is the crisis for you? On the one hand is the legality of your duties, that people who are not eligible should not be given this benefit. On the other hand is the genuine welfare for this old, poor, destitute woman. Now here, what tool do you use? Here you use what we call empathy. And if you genuinely empathize with her, you will use internal mechanisms to be able to validate her eligibility. In plain simple words, every single government ID that you have, the government also has a copy of the same. All that you can do if you empathize. What is empathy? Putting yourself in her shoes. If you put yourself in her shoes, very soon you will realize that all that you need to do is inquire into your own department, identify her records, and using the records, get new records made for her, or using the records, extend the benefits under the scheme to her. Finally, if I want to use one more tool, which is social skills, let's say somewhere in the country, there are protests happening against the development of a special economic zone in that area. Why are people protesting? Because their land is being acquired by the government. In this case, what is the crisis? Economic development on the one hand and sustained social welfare on the other. We will compensate them for the acquisition of the land, but we know that many of the people may not have the ability to use the compensation for long-term sustainability, for long-term survival. Here, what tool do you use? You use social skills. And using these social skills, you encourage people to develop better job skills, so that when the special economic zone comes up, they can be absorbed as good and hardworking labor potential for that very special economic zone. So again, wherever there's a crisis that we are facing, it is emotional intelligence and the different tools that are involved over here which will help us arrive at a reasonable response through which that crisis can be resolved. Next question that we look at over here is question number 5A. In fact, this now is from Ethics in International Relations or International Ethics. Question is relevant, but in the question it is very important that you do not say something that is controversial. It is very important that you do not say something that is critical of your own country. The question very simply says, refugees should not be turned back to the country where they are likely to face persecution or human right violations. Examine the statement with regard to the ethical dimensions being violated by a country that claims to be democratic, by a country that claims that they have an open society. First, before we start answering, let me first take a look at what exactly the context over here is. First, who's a refugee? A refugee, very simply, is a person who, because of the fear of being persecuted. Why do you fear being persecuted? Because of your beliefs, because of your race, because of your caste, because of your political opinions, because of your religion. A person who fears being persecuted, which is why at the moment he or she is living outside the country of their nationality, and they are unable or they are even unwilling to return to their original country, to return to their home country because of the fear of that persecution. Such an individual is what you refer to as a refugee. This is not a migrant, this is a refugee. A migrant could be someone who wants to go to a foreign country, wants to come to your country for better education, wants to settle down there because of better business opportunities, job opportunities. That person has many options. This person has no option. He cannot return to his home country because of that fear of persecution. The UNHCR, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, says that at any point in time, there are roughly about 30 million refugees in the world today. Many of them have been in exile for more than 5 years. They're living in detention centers, they're living in temporary camps in very poor everyday living conditions. For these people, there is very little hope of repatriation. What is repatriation? Return. Since the number is very large, since they've been living in these very poor conditions for a long time, since there is very little hope that is left to them, these people, these refugees, are certainly worthy of our moral attention. They are certainly worthy of the moral attention not for an individual but for the entire global community. Now, in this global community of all the nation states that we can look at, the ones that the question specifically focuses on are those that claim to be democratic with an open society. Where does the word open society come from? Open society is a, what should I say, is a term that was used by a philosopher called Karl Popper. And Karl Popper said that an open society is one which is based on political freedom, which is based on the maintenance of human rights. And for this, it is absolutely essential that the country must be democratic in character. Now, since you are an open society, since you claim to be an open society, since you claim to be democratic, it is very important that you understand that every single individual, every single nation has a basic humanitarian duty to assist those who are in danger, to assist those who are in peril, especially when the cost of helping them, the cost of doing this is low. If by extending assistance to someone else, you can save them from persecution, you can save them from human rights violations, it is your basic humanitarian duty to do that. And a simple analogy that we use here is the bomb shelter analogy. What is the bomb shelter? You are living in a city, you have a house, and in the basement of your house, you have made a strong room. The country is currently at war. Very frequently, the enemy air force comes and drops bombs on your city, or the artillery fires bombs into your city. You have a basement room which is absolutely safe from these bomb blasts. And let's say the room is large enough for your family to come there comfortably. If you notice that standing outside your house right now, there are a few people who are running to save themselves from this bomb attack, it is your basic humanitarian duty to help these people out. If there is enough space in the room, and let's say there are 5 people outside, you can always ask them to come and stay inside as long as the bombing is going on. That's your basic humanitarian duty. And by extension, every nation should do the same. If you have natural resources, if you have financial resources, if you have social resources through which you can absorb refugees from other countries and enable them to live peacefully in your country, that is your basic humanitarian duty. However, that is what you should do. However, the question says, what are the ethical dimensions that are being violated by a country that claims to be democratic and with an open society? What is the dimension that is violated? The dimension that is violated is the sentence given right on top, that this humanitarian duty of assisting people who are in danger, who are in peril, is very frequently violated. How is it violated? By using technicalities, by using legalities as an excuse to avoid ethical deliberation. When we talk about ethics and when we talk about the law, we say that very often, whatever is legal usually will also be ethically and morally right. It is very difficult, it is very rare to find a law, very difficult to find a law that specifically commands you to do something unethical. There will be examples, but they are very few. However, even when legality is ethical, there will be people, there will be institutions, there will be even nations which will use legal procedures or legalities as a reason, as an excuse to avoid ethical deliberation. How do you do that? For example, number one, We define a refugee as a person who has a fear of being persecuted if they return to their home country. But when you insist that persecution is an essential criteria for categorizing someone as a refugee or for giving them asylum, for giving them refuge, this understanding, this definition itself is very narrow. Why is it narrow? Because this criteria should also include the inability, the incapacity of the home state to grant them their bare basic rights. The criteria for being considered as a refugee should also include people who are suffering because of prolonged natural disasters. Already it is, we are in 2022. It is already estimated that before this century is over, the maximum number of refugees in this world will not be refugees of violence, will not be refugees of genocide. They will be what we'll call climate change refugees. People who had to leave the area of their origin, the region where they were born, where they lived, only because climate change has worsened conditions to such an extent that living there anymore is not sustainable. What are you doing? By defining this very narrowly, by defining the criteria very narrowly, you're getting rid of your ethical responsibilities. Number two, many nations ignore reparative obligations that they have. What do you mean by reparative? Reparative very simply means your obligations for repair. But why would any nation be obligated to provide reparative actions to repair? Because many refugee conditions are created, are aggravated because of foreign military interventions, because of foreign military invasions. For example, if I take a look at a country such as Iraq, in Iraq, the refugee crisis was created by the US invasion in the early 2000s, 2002, 2003. Similarly, climate change, we're just talking about climate refugees here. Climate change is being aggravated. The pace of climate change is increasing. It is being exacerbated not because of poor countries, not because of underdeveloped countries. The rate of climate change is increasing because of industrialized countries. And if you are the ones responsible, if I look at a country such as the US, their carbon footprint, their ecological footprint is significantly higher than a country such as Lebanon or than a country such as let's say Nigeria. Climate change is being aggravated because of the actions of industrialized countries. So it is your obligation to provide reparative actions. And in these kind of actions, even the criteria of low cost should not apply. Earlier we said that it is your humanitarian duty to assist others when the cost is low. But here, since the damage, since the factor has been caused by you, even the cost, whether it is low or high, should not apply. But that you ignore, you violate consistently. Third and most importantly is the principle of what we call non-refoulement. What is non-refoulement? The principle of non-refoulement creates an obligation upon every country to provide protection to refugees who arrive at their territory. See, we always say that a law or legal procedures can be used as an excuse to either do something or to avoid doing something. Now here, what is the problem with this principle? The principle is binding, binding upon every country, whether or not you signed a convention, whether or not you ratified a treaty. It is your basic moral duty, your basic humanitarian obligation. However, the problem is that this principle creates no legal obligation upon a country to rescue people who are outside your domain, who are outside your borders. So now what will countries do? Countries know that they have to provide asylum to people who come to their borders, who come to their territory, but there is no obligation if they're outside. So now they will adopt very strong migration control measures. They will adopt very strong border control measures to contain refugees in their own region, wherever they originated from. What are you doing? What you're doing is legally correct, but ethically and morally, you know that you're trying to avoid, you're trying to escape your responsibilities. As a result, the irony of the world today is that most refugees are being hosted by the poorer states, by states which have very limited resources. The richer states with a very high proportion of resources are usually not hosting them. One country that I always quote as an example here is a country called Lebanon. Lebanon has a population of 70 lakh people, but is currently hosting about 15 lakh Syrian refugees. That's more than 20% of their population. And why are they doing that? They're doing that because they believe it is their humanitarian duty. And it's not that Lebanon is very well off. They've had a very long civil war. They've had very high levels of inflation. They've had very high rates of unemployment. Yet, they're performing their basic humanitarian duties. But when you ask these countries, these poorer countries, to perform these kind of duties, this will create a greater strain upon their resources. This will further deepen deprivation. Over a period of time, it will lead to an escalation of conflict. And when the conflict arises, that will give birth to even more refugees. And the cycle will start off again. So the dimension that you're violating again is that you're ignoring your basic humanitarian duties, your moral duties, only on the basis of legalities and technicalities. Next question that we look at is a very simple question, question number 5B, very direct, very theoretical. It says, should being impartial and non-partisan be considered indispensable qualities to make a civil servant, successful civil servant? Discuss with illustrations. Now, when we consider impartiality and non-partisanship, this can be understood with regard to the people. This can be understood with regard to the political executive. With regard to the people, what does impartiality mean? Impartiality means that there should be no discrimination on the basis of caste, religion, gender, etc. And what is the advantage, or what is the illustration? That if you ask an impartial civil servant, he will not discriminate. For example, a penalty, a challan has to be issued for violation of traffic rules. The challan will be the same regardless of your economic status. You commit a traffic violation, you jump a traffic signal, whether you're riding a bike or whether you're driving a Mercedes, the challan will be issued. Why? Because the civil servant concerned here is impartial. He focuses on enforcing the law equally. Similarly, if you have an impartial civil servant, this will protect the interests of the weaker sections. How will it protect the interests? For example, he will not forcibly evict a village just because a special economic zone or a factory or some new infrastructure has to be created for a private individual. Number 3, this will promote collective welfare. How? Because policy decisions are taken on the basis of their impact on every section of society. They will not benefit a few at the expense of the many. Every single person will benefit simultaneously. That is the advantage of having impartiality if you talk about it with regard to the public. But the same impartiality can also be considered with regard to the political executive. With regard to the political executive, the impartiality of a civil servant is what we refer to as administrative neutrality. What is administrative neutrality? That every 5 years, when the political executive in the country changes, you as a civil servant are expected to realign yourself and serve the existing political executive dutifully and faithfully. What is the advantage? That number 1, this ensures responsiveness to changing public needs. The political executive represents current public needs, current public aspirations. And every 5 years, when the political executive changes, if the civil servant is neutral, it will ensure responsiveness to the current public needs. For example, the civil servant will give advice. You as a civil servant are the expert. You will give advice to the political executive that addresses the changing policy decisions, the changing policy needs. For instance, giving technical advice for reservations or changing the criteria of reservation to include not only socially backward groups but even economically weaker sections. How are you doing this? Because again, you are impartial, you're changing depending upon the changing circumstances. Number 2, it ensures continuity in the working of the government. How does it ensure continuity? Every time a new political executive comes into power, they will have some new policy objectives, but the resources that you have are always constrained. There's, for example, the amount of money you have, financial resources are always limited. Impartiality now ensures that there will be continuity. How? For example, in India, we had the MGNREGA for a long time. Then the government decided in 2014 to introduce the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. But we may not, both of them are very expensive programs. We may not have money for both. An impartial civil servant, what will he recommend? He will recommend convergence of the two programs. That the labor component, which is used for Swachh Bharat, can be financed under the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan but can continue to give employment under the NREGA. By giving this advice, what are you doing? You are maintaining continuity in the working, efficiency also in the working of the government. And number three, it prevents a politicization of the bureaucracy. Impartial civil servants will not align themselves with one political party or the other. And in doing this, what are they promoting? They are ensuring public welfare rather than the welfare of only a politician or only a political party. And you've benefited the people, you're benefiting the political executive. This will also give benefits within the bureaucracy itself. Why? Because if you have impartiality, if you have impartial civil servants, first, it will promote better morale, it will promote better performance. Because every civil servant knows that if he gets a promotion, if he gets appreciated, if he gets a reward, that will not be on the basis of his connections, it will only be on the basis of his merit and his performance. The harder you work, the more meritorious you are, the higher the chances of your career advancement. Number two, it promotes a genuine recognition of merit, because your performance appraisals, your appreciation, your advancement again is based on merit, not connections. And number three, it promotes, or it prevents rather, tendencies of blind obedience. That you take a decision based on the merit of the decision, you don't blindly obey the political executive. Where did you see blind obedience? For example, Germany under the Nazis, the Jewish Holocaust. The kind of horrors that we saw during the Second World War in Germany and its neighboring countries were possible not because of the Nazi government or the political government, but because bureaucrats at that point in time blindly obeyed every order that was given to them. You are here to obey orders, but not to obey them blindly. You must use your discretion, for which again, impartiality is absolutely essential. One more question that remains from the theoretical part, for as far as I am supposed to discuss here, is question number 6A. Question 6A says that an independent and empowered social audit mechanism is an absolute must in every sphere of public service, especially in the judiciary, to ensure performance, accountability, and ethical conduct. Now, in this answer, what will you write? Number one, they are talking about an independent and empowered social audit mechanism. Number two, they are specifically talking about the judiciary. So first explain to us what is a social audit mechanism. Number two, tell us what are the limitations, what are the problems that we face, for example, with regard to independence and empowerment. Number three, if possible, add a small example. And number four, conclude by showing how a social audit mechanism can even be incorporated into the judiciary. To understand that, first, what is a social audit mechanism? A social audit is a participatory tool that focuses on citizen participation, and the focus of the citizen participation is on the performance and the accountability of government servants. That your performance should be up to the expected standards, and where it is not, we will hold you accountable, we will demand action against you. A social audit mechanism is an extension of other forms of citizen participation. It is not different, but it is an extension. What other forms of citizen participation? For example, public demonstrations. For example, protests. For example, public hearings, Janta Darbars, and so on. The purpose of these tools is largely to only express citizen concerns, to only express citizen voice. Social audit mechanisms go one step forward because they not only express your voice, they also demand accountability wherever performance is seen to be substandard. And this is, what is the objective? The objective is to monitor, to track, to analyze, to evaluate performance, and to make public officials accountable for their actions. It is essentially a form of social oversight, a form of social accountability to ensure that your public servants work transparently, effectively, and ethically. Problem, however, is now this briefly tell us what exactly is a social audit mechanism. More importantly, understand that with these mechanisms, there are always some problems that we face. What are the problems? That number one, for a social audit mechanism to be able to function effectively, to actually produce the desired results, the people need to be aware, they need to be persistent, and they need to be demanding. Problem that we face, however, is that many citizens lack awareness about their rights, about their entitlements. And if you don't know your rights, you cannot demand them from the government. Second problem that we face is that citizens expect that even if they demand accountability, demand better performance, they will get results very soon. And if they don't get the results very quickly, almost instantly, they get discouraged very easily. Number two, a social audit mechanism to be effective needs punitive powers. What is punitive? The authority to enforce punishment. Because if I cannot punish you for accountability, if I cannot punish a civil servant, he will keep repeating the same malpractice, the same misbehavior even in the future. Problem, however, is that most of these tools, most of these social audit mechanisms are restricted to only expressing their dissatisfaction, are restricted only to advising corrective action. They cannot enforce that corrective action by themselves. And number three, this is why we say that for these mechanisms to be successful, they will need the support of the government. How do you need support? You need political will, you need institutional support, you need enabling policies. But these very frequently are not found. When they are found, social audit mechanisms will be able to deliver the desired results. And one example from the state of Rajasthan that I would quote here is the example of the Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan. The Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan, the members of this organization realized that there was a lot of corruption at the level of Panchayati Raj expenditure, Panchayati budgets. To examine whether there was corruption happening, whether the allocated money was spent on the intended purpose, they demanded access to government records, but this demand was denied. Now, if the demand is denied, it is the government who has the authority. But you must remember that the government exists not for their welfare, but rather for the welfare and the service of the people. If they are not acting in the right manner, if they're not conducting themselves in the right manner, you must be able to enforce accountability upon them. How do you enforce accountability? The Mazdoor Kisan Sangathan did not give up easily. They started organizing public hearings. And in these public hearings, in these public meetings, they focused on creating mass awareness amongst the people regarding the corruption that they believed was happening in panchayats. And they used this mass awareness to demand accountability from the government. Now, if you try to demand accountability, it will not come immediately. It will not come instantly. What we're saying right over here, you will need to put in persistent efforts over a sustained period of time. And after a certain point of time, this attracted the attention of the Chief Minister of Rajasthan. Very soon, the government issued a notification allowing people to access the records of panchayati expenditures. After some time, this permission was also extended to allow them to also photocopy the records, ensuring that even in the future, 6 months from today, 3 years from today, you can examine older records, compare them with the existing records, and demand better performance, even greater accountability from the government officials. This is why we say that for social accountability mechanisms to be efficient, to actually produce the desired result, these problems will have to be overcome. What are these problems? Two. Number one, independence is compromised if the government does not support them. And number two, they are not empowered unless and until the first two criteria are satisfied. Now, one dimension given in the question specifically was about the judiciary. If I want to use a social audit in judicial institutions, what is the problem? The problem is, or the challenge rather I would say, is that judicial decisions are final and they are not open to review or examination by any external institution. If you have a problem with a verdict given by a district court, you can go to the High Court. You have a problem in the High Court, you can go to the Supreme Court. But once the Supreme Court gives a verdict, other than filing a review petition, which may be dismissed, you do not have any authority, you do not have any other alternative. As a result of which, many people very quietly, very meekly accept even questionable verdicts, even questionable behavior. Why do they accept it? Because people know that if you try to challenge, if you try to question, if you try to criticize a judicial decision, the court also has the authority to punish you for a contempt of court. As a result of which, questionable verdicts, questionable behavior is quietly accepted. How do you overcome this? Social audit. What form will a social audit take in this case? For example, here what you recommend is a judicial ombudsman. Who's an ombudsman, by the way? This is what you call a citizen's representative. This could be a judicial officer, could be a retired judge who accepts and investigates grievances on behalf of aggrieved citizens. Wherever they believe that the verdict is questionable, wherever they believe there's been a miscarriage of justice, they can now demand that the judicial ombudsman inquires into it and then recommends appropriate corrective action. So that is what you'll say here for social audit mechanisms. Number one, what are they? Number two, what are the limitations? And number three, for the judiciary specifically, how can you recommend a social audit mechanism? Now, these are some questions from section A of your paper.
The answer to question number 6B part, integrity is a value that powers human beings. Justify it with the help of illustration. So what is integrity? Integrity is the soundness of moral principles. It is the person's sense of wholeness deriving from honesty and consistent uprightness of character, the ability to do right things for the right reason. The core values that inspire integrity happen to be openness, fairness, justice, objectivity, empathy, etc. And the two most outstanding examples of integrity happens to be number one, Socrates, and second, our own milkman, the father of milk revolution in India, Mr. Kurian. Socrates stood for his best judgment of truth and even laid down his life defending the truth. He pointed out flaws in the Athenian government, challenged the political status quo, made many enemies by criticizing those who were in powerful positions. He was accused of corrupting the youth and disrespecting the gods and was forced to drink hemlock. His commitment to truth can be seen in the form that even when his disciples had arranged for his escape, he did not run away from facing the punishment because he believed that one should not disobey the city laws, and that is why he consumed hemlock. Likewise, we can say Mr. Kurian made daring as an instrument of change, both technical and social and as well as economic change. He was the father of white revolution in India, and he showed that how by putting the instruments of the development in the hands of the man, human beings can be empowered. The milk revolution that Mr. Kurian brought about was through the empowerment that he was able to achieve through his Amul model. He transformed the country from being importer to dairy products to the world's largest milk producer through the system of farming cooperatives. These two are the outstanding examples of how integrity empowers individuals to do wonderful things. Question number 7 is a very simple case study, which in brief can be put across like this, that Sunil is a young civil servant with integrity. He is given a challenging and a sensitive assignment. He is posted in a tribal dominated district notorious for illegal sand mining. The mafia operators operate in the district, and the official employees are hand in glove with the sand mafia. Sunil takes the action against sand mafia. The sand mafia were rattled by the action by Sunil. The mafia turns hostile and threatens Sunil and his family. This is the gist of the case study, and then the questions were: identify different options available to Sunil in attending to this situation. This was question number 1. Question number 2 was: critically evaluate each of the options listed by you. And question number 3 was: which of the above do you think would be most appropriate for Sunil to adopt? Now, Sunil, in order to meet the challenge posed by sand mafia, can display a variety of actions which can be classified under 2 headings. Number 1, moral actions, and number 2, immoral actions. Moral actions and immoral actions. Now, what are the moral actions that are available with Sunil? Number one, he registers the case against said mafia as per the law of the land and continues his stringent action against the mafia undeterred by the threats they pose to him and his family. Now, this is one of the options that is available to Sunil. The second is he can place the wrongdoing on record and apprise the seniors in his department and as well as tribal advisory bodies at the state level about the matter. Now, the third option that is available to Sunil is to take help of media, NGO and other stakeholders if the need be to put pressure on the mafia to stop their activities. And of course, the fourth option here, which is under the section of moral action, available to Sunil is to take police protection for himself and his family. Now, if we were to evaluate the set of moral actions that are taken by Sunil, so let us be very clear regarding them that these actions are likely to be governed by the voice of his conscience. So there is a reason to feel satisfied and contented after carrying out these actions. Second is, it is likely to project the image of Sunil as an officer of integrity who goes beyond the call of his duty. Who goes beyond the call of his duty. The third positive with this action is that Sunil can have satisfaction of carrying out his constitutional duty, which is so very important for a public servant. And it could be that the integrity, impartiality and fairness that he has demonstrated might result in some rewarding outcome for him later on in life. However, there is a flip side also to these set of actions that he performs. And one is, of course, that there may be increased tension in his personal and professional life, and this tension might have lot of other ramifications as well, and his mental, physical and emotional well-being may be compromised to some extent. Now, these are the set of moral actions that are available to Sunil. There are a set of immoral actions also Sunil can do. One is that he join hands with mafia. Second is he urges his department seniors to relieve him of responsibility. And third is that he may become inactive in order to buy peace with mafia. Now, all these three options which are there are likely to lower self-esteem and self-efficacy of Sunil. They are likely to lower self-esteem and self-efficacy of Sunil. And these options also can damage his reputation as an honest officer. His reputation as an honest officer honest officer can stand to be damaged. That is another side of it. And of course, these immoral actions also will make him live with mutilated conscience all his life. However, if one was to see what kind of personal benefits they may accrue to Sunil, so we can say that this action may reward him with some ill-gotten gains. Number two, it may result in him not being harmed. That is also some kind of a benefit that Sunil might get, that him not being harmed. But remember that even if there are gains to be made and harm to be avoided, there is every possibility in the longer run Sunil may be implicated of wrongdoing if he was to follow this path. Now in this case study, there is a last part as well, which talks about which of the above options would be most appropriate for Sunil to adopt and why. So needless to say, the best course of course would be for Sunil to continue his crusade against the wrongdoers and make sure that wrongdoers are punished for their unethical actions. And in doing so, Sunil should bring all stakeholders on board, and Sunil should do this not just because it is a constitutional duty of his, but also as a public servant, also because as a public servant he has a duty to uphold the law of the land and provide justice in a fair manner. So this brings to end this first case study, and now let us look at case study number 2. Now study number 2 talks about another situation where, this is question number 8, where you happen to be a principal of a degree college, a vice principal of a degree college, you happen to be a vice principal of degree college. The principal has recently retired. There are feelers from management that they may promote you as principal. Then annual examination was held. In that examination, 2 students were caught by the flying squad cheating. One happened to be the son of local politician who had helped college get affiliated to a reputed university, and second was businessman who had made huge donation to the college. You report to the management about the cheating that was being carried out with the connivance of a senior lecturer. The management of the college instructed you to resolve the issue with flying squad at any cost, and that they were not in a position to antagonize these 2 important personalities. Meantime, the student union came to know about the wrongdoing, and they demanded action against the 2 students as well as the senior lecturer. Now the question was that what are the ethical issues involved in the case, and then critically examine the options available with you as vice principal, and what option would you choose and why. Now the ethical issues involved here are many. Number 1, intellectual integrity versus personal gain. Intellectual integrity, as you know, is the search for truth versus personal gain. The second issue is loyalty to management versus loyalty to educational system. The third issue is courage versus cowardice. The display of courage versus cowardice. And the fourth issue is fairness and justice. Fairness and justice versus deliberate bias and partisan behavior. These are the prominent issues that are involved in this case. Now, as you know, there is a next question also. Critically examine the options available with you as vice principal and what option will you adopt and why. Now again, like the previous case, the options available are number one, the legitimate options. The legitimate options and the illegitimate options. So there are options which are legitimate and illegitimate options. Now among the illegitimate options, one is to submit to the pressure and demands of the management and be party to the wrongdoing knowingly and willingly. Knowingly and willingly. Now this action may get some material benefits for the vice principal, but is for sure likely to damage his conscience and tarnish his image as a fair and just and an upright teacher, not only in his own eyes, but also in the eyes of others. Now the second action, which is of immoral, illegitimate type that is possible, is not do anything or try to escape from the situation. This could be the second option. This would be some kind of dereliction of duty and may have far-reaching negative impact on his future career. Now, among the legitimate options that are available, first and foremost, we can say, being a man of integrity and character with commitment to education, the vice principal should refuse to compromise, ignore the petty considerations offered by management, and act against the defaulters. This action by vice principal may no doubt jeopardize the chances of him becoming principal, but this sacrifice is almost nothing when compared with the benefits it is likely to produce. The first and the foremost is it will ensure that his image of fair and just teacher is upheld. His actions will ensure that the integrity of the examination system is not compromised. His respect in the eyes of his students shall increase. And also, there is every likelihood that he will feel very satisfied and happy after carrying out this action. Now, if by chance principal's efforts to bring about justice and punish the wrongdoers fails, then the second thing he can do here is to report the matter to DM and seek his intervention. He can also, as the part of third action, make senior lecturer and the management understand about the implications of their action and how it is likely to tarnish the image of college in time to come. If these things fail to produce results, then he can bring the matter to the notice of media and NGO and tell them about how some influential people with connivance of senior lecturer are subverting the examination system. And last but not the least, he can keep all stakeholders informed, especially the students, about the action of wrongdoers. And all these actions are necessary to uphold the integrity of examination system. Now then, there is a part of the question which asks that what option will you adopt and why? So the first the option of carrying out the action against the wrongdoers is the one which I will adopt. This is because at no stage a teacher should allow the integrity of examination system to be compromised. Now, by chance, if our actions in our capacity are not producing results, then we can definitely seek intervention of DM, inform all stakeholders, inform media, and also inform the agitating students about the actions being taken, so that they are also pacified and they are also happy to know that ultimately justice shall be done. So this brings to end this case study number 8 also.
Question number 9, or case study number 9 was this one. It talks about an elevated corridor. You have been appointed as the project manager of this corridor. It's a very prestigious project in the capital city. You've been appointed on the basis of your professional competence, of your professional experience. An inspection team realized during a surprise inspection, they witnessed a minor crack in one of the piers. This pier was possibly because of the poor quality of the material that was used. You immediately called up the chief engineer and in the meantime stopped work on the construction of this corridor. According to your assessment, a minimum of 3 pillars will have to be demolished and reconstructed, and this will lead to a delay of 4 to 6 months. Problem is that this project has to be completed within the next 2 years because the minister concerned wants the chief minister to inaugurate this project this corridor before the next elections are due. When you told the chief engineer overruled your observations. He said that a minor crack will not impact the strength, will not impact the durability of this flyover. The chief engineer further, and this is the word that you pay attention to, further ordered you to overlook this observation and to go on with the work. The minister, on the other hand, does not want any delay. He wants the chief minister to inaugurate it before the elections are conducted. The contractor involved is a relative of the minister. It is further hinted to you that at the moment, your promotion as additional chief engineer is being considered by the ministry. What is this? This is a temptation to tell you to overlook this matter and let the construction proceed as expected. But you, on the other hand, and this the case very clearly specifies, you strongly feel that the minor crack will adversely affect the health of the corridor, and you believe that it is not dangerous, it is very dangerous not to repair these piers. This is the case that was given to you, and now in this case, there are 4 questions that you've been asked. The first part, question 9A says, under these options, under the given conditions, what are the options available to you as a project manager? What are the options? Now here you mention all possible options and then narrow down to the option that is more worthy, that is more acceptable. First option, a very easy option, is to obey the chief engineer, resume the construction and forget about that crack. Second option is to try and reason with the chief engineer, tell him your objections and try to convince him about the necessity of the repairs. Number 3, you can say that I will ask the chief engineer to give me the order in writing, and if he gives the order in writing, I will resume the work. And number 4, you can say that I will not resume the work and I will use all available means to ensure that the piers are repaired. Of these 4 alternatives, the first alternative and the third alternative are absolutely unacceptable. Just because your superior is pressurizing you, because your superior demands that you do something, does not mean that you will endanger public welfare, you will endanger public lives. The correct answer would be a combination of the second and the fourth option stated over here. Why? Because your fundamental objective is to ensure public safety and the health of this bridge. So that is your first answer, the options that are available to you as the project manager. Number 2, what are the ethical dimensions faced by the project manager and what response can he give to address these dilemmas? What are the dilemmas? Number 1 is the delay in the construction of a very prestigious project. On the other hand, is public safety, public welfare. Second dilemma, disobeying a direct order given by a senior, given by a superior, as compared to dereliction of duties. If you obey the senior, you will not be able to do your duties. And if you want to do your duties, you will have to necessarily disobey the chief engineer. Third dilemma is earning the minister's support, earning the minister's patronage, earning the minister's praise. On the other hand, sacrificing the chances of promotion. You have one of 2 options. Either you can go for the promotion or and keep the minister happy, or you can try to do your duty. Number 4 is contributing to the chief minister's election campaign on the one hand, and second is the performance of your duties. How do you resolve? What should the project manager's response to these dilemmas be? Very simply, that you must ensure, under all circumstances, must ensure that the piers are repaired. Why? Because number 1, he strongly feels that it is very dangerous to not repair them. And if you have strong reasons to believe that the repairs are necessary, then they must be executed. Number 2, because public safety is more important than a deadline, is more important than a promotion, is more important than an election. If even one person dies because of the crack, or if the elevated corridor collapses, that would not be a cost that we should be willing to take. And number 3, because the long-term consequences of ignoring this, of ignoring the repairs, can be absolutely disastrous, can be absolutely fatal. That's your second question. What are the ethical dilemmas and what is the response? Third question asked over here, what are the professional challenges likely to be faced by the project manager and what response can he offer to overcome them? Now, the second question was asking about the ethical dilemmas. Third question is the professional challenges. What are the professional challenges? Number 1, the minister and the chief engineer both are telling you to do something that you think should not be done. So number 1 is resistance, pressure and even harassment at the hands of the superiors. Number 2, a stigma on professional abilities because the error was not detected earlier. The crack happened because substandard material was used. But if substandard material was used, why is it that it did not come to your attention in time? Why did you not notice it earlier? Number 3, completing the repairs within the stipulated budget, within the stipulated deadline. We are saying that 3 piers will have to be demolished and reconstructed. Extra time is 4 to 6 months, but that will also cost extra money. So that's your third challenge, being able to finish the work within the budget, within the deadline. And number 4, the professional embarrassment that you'll face if the project is delayed or if even the flyover or the corridor collapses. What is your response for this? Response will remain the same. You will not change that answer. You will say, I will still try to repair the piers in the most resource efficient manner possible. How do you do that? Number one, noting your objections on record. Chief engineer is not agreeing, minister is trying to pressurize you. So put your objections, your suspicions, any objections that you have on record in writing for scrutiny by the concerned stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders? That could be the common public using the RTI. That could be the judiciary. That could be independent watchdogs. That could be NGOs. That could be the media, opposition parties. Put your objections on record. Number two, seek an independent audit, independent inspection of the construction quality. Because any such independent audit will identify the crack and then will order that the crack should be repaired. What are you ensuring? Public safety. And number three, reassign the workflows and the cost wherever it is feasible. What does that mean? Reassign workflows means that you redesign your work allocation, manpower allocation, machinery allocation, so that the work can be now completed at a slightly faster pace. And wherever it is possible, start cutting costs. Through this, what are you trying to do? You are trying to address these challenges that you are facing here. And the fourth question given over here, what are the consequences of overlooking the observation raised by the inspecting team? This is fairly simple to answer, but number one, the corridor may collapse in the future, causing a loss of life and property. If that happens, number two, the chief minister will lose public goodwill, will lose public support. Number three, the minister's relative will face an investigation for sure, the contractor, and he may lose the chances of obtaining contracts in the future. And number four, for the project manager himself, the promotion now becomes extremely unlikely because his professional competence, his professional abilities have come into question. If the corridor collapses, there is also the possibility of strict disciplinary action being taken against him. That is your question number 9. There were 4 questions that were given as part of this case study, which makes the answer somewhat lengthy. Therefore, when you're writing, I've given about 3-4 points per question. But when you're writing, if even 2 of these have been mentioned per question, that would be a satisfactory answer in the exam hall. The next case study was case study number 10. Case study number 10 gave a lot of information in the beginning. Again, that India had a coronavirus pandemic. We faced a lot of problems. Children had to go online. Problems between haves and have-nots. When you read this case, the first half of the case gives you a lot of information, and a person, starts expecting that they will ask something about the COVID pandemic on a very large, broad scale. But then suddenly the question narrows down and it specifies that you are a hospital administrator, and it asks you are the hospital administrator at a time when the coronavirus pandemic is really spreading and more people are coming to your hospital for treatment. This is why again we say that by the time you come here, maybe the intention behind making you read so much is so that now when you give an answer, you focus specifically on your instinctive reactions, so that we can very, very correctly, very accurately assess, do you actually have the ability to answer on the basis of your instinct? What is the genuine, truthful answer that you will come out with? Now, this is what it said to you, that you're a public administrator in a public hospital, hospital administrator in a public hospital. The first question over here says, what is the criteria and justification you will use to tell your clinical and non-clinical staff to attend to the patients, knowing that the disease is highly infectious and knowing that resources and infrastructure are very limited? Now here, there are some students who will start by writing in a very general manner. They will say that I will create some COVID safety protocol. For example, by putting spots on the floor, telling people to stand in a queue at a distance, safe distance from each other. I will distribute free masks. I will make it mandatory to sanitize your hands before coming in. I will put in sanitization corridors. I will play a strong leadership role in leading, motivating, encouraging my staff to attend to the patients. If you write this, you're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct in your understanding. But you are not addressing the question that is being asked. The question says, what is the criteria that you will use and the justification you will use to tell your staff to attend to the patients? We are not asking you how you will tell them to attend them or how you will encourage, motivate them. We are asking you, what criteria will you use? So what criteria do you use? Number 1, start with your own staff. distinguish between staff that have or that do not have comorbidities. There may be people in your clinical and non-clinical staff who either have diabetes or have hypertension or have high blood pressure or have some comorbidity or the other. Why are you doing this? You are doing this to avoid fatalities, avoid problems within your staff and maintain adequate staff strength. Why? Because those who have morbidities or those who do not will be assigned duties on the basis of the presence or the absence of these comorbidities. Those who do not have comorbidities, those who are healthy, these people can be assigned frontline operations. But those people who have comorbidities, I don't want them to suffer. I don't want to lose them. So they now can be assigned to back-end operations. What are back-end operations? For example, telemedicine. For example, teleconsultation. For example, setting up an emergency response hotline. For example, preventive consultation. I would prefer to use them here so that they can still assist the people, they can still assist citizens, but the chances of any mishap are significantly reduced. Number 3, even when we assign these people these duties, we should frequently rotate their duties, especially for the frontline staff. Why do I adopt this criteria? To ensure that we minimize the chances of a person getting infected and simultaneously to return the staff to duty as quickly as possible after they've been refreshed, after they've been renewed. 4th, that treatment in the hospital must be based on exclusion criteria. What do you mean by exclusion criteria? That if a person has mild symptoms, if we assess the probability of survival, if people want elective surgeries, these are people that we would ordinarily want should be put at a second priority. Why? Because the flow of patients coming in is very high. We want to address people who have a high chance of survival, where medical assistance can actually benefit them. If a person has very mild symptoms, I would prefer that they do not put a burden on the formal healthcare system. The same symptoms can be addressed through some basic preventive care even at home. Justification: optimize your resources and reduce the burden on your formal healthcare system. And 5th, finally, you must have an assessment mechanism through which you can on a real time assess arriving and waiting patients. How many people are coming, how many people are still waiting, and how many people are currently being treated. What does this ensure? This ensures again that in real time we can bring about changes in the treatment criteria based on the availability of resources, whether it is medicines, whether it is equipment, or whether it is manpower. And number 2, this can ensure time critical interventions. The focus, that part has gone missing from here, but focus on those whose chances of survival are higher. Use your resources judiciously to benefit the maximum number of people in the least amount of resources, because this pandemic will continue for some time. That is your question 10A. Question 10B says, if your decision is a private hospital, will your jurisdiction and your decision remain the same as that of a government hospital? First is the jurisdiction. Here you will say that jurisdiction will depend upon government guidelines. We would want to serve as many people as possible, but the jurisdiction will be determined by government guidelines. For example, when the very first lockdown was withdrawn on the 31st of May 2020, at that time, before Delhi opened its borders, the Delhi government announced that treatment in Delhi hospitals would be reserved only for citizens of Delhi. Central government hospitals could treat whoever they wanted, but Delhi government hospitals and Delhi private hospitals would treat only residents of Delhi. So here, if you're a private hospital also, your jurisdiction will be determined not by you, but by government guidelines. However, will your decision be the same? Here with conviction, you will say yes. The decision will be the same. Why? Because we are bound by the Hippocratic Oath. Every doctor is bound by the Hippocratic Oath. Will try to do their very best to serve the people to the best of their abilities. It will be our endeavor to provide good, to provide timely, to provide affordable healthcare, depending upon or constrained by government guidelines and situational constraints. And the criteria will not change. The same criteria that we were looking at earlier, that will remain the same. One more case study that is given here is case number 11. Very simple case. A similar case had come about 3 years back also, and the answer here also is very simple. The case says there's a reputed food product company based in India. They've developed a food product that they're exporting. They also announced to the people in India that we'll start developing the product, and after getting the approvals, we'll start selling the product in the domestic market also. Internationally and domestically, the product did very well. The company earned a lot of market share. They earned a lot of profits also. However, very recently, a random sample test found that the product that is being sold in the country, within the country domestically, is in variance with the approval that was received from the competent authority. On further investigation, it was discovered that not only was the product in variance, this company was not only not meeting the health standards, they were also using a lot of rejected export goods and selling those rejected export products in the domestic market. As a result of this, the reputation and the profitability of the company has been significantly declined. In this case, the first question that you asked, 11A, what actions should be taken by the competent authority against the food company? Now here there are many examples that you can use as a reference. You can consider Nestle and Maggi. You can consider Cadbury chocolates when we found worms in them. You can consider Volkswagen and that entire emission scandal. In all the cases, the response that you give is more or less the same. Number one, that the competent authority should ban any further sales and stop production of this product with immediate effect. Number two, recall the product which is in the market, recall all the product from the market and immediately destroy it. Number three, suspend the manufacturing and the export license of this company. Number four, impose monetary penalties. In fact, that is what is given in most laws in the country. Number five, issue public notices in all publication platforms, whether it is newspapers, magazines, television channels, even your radio channels. Issue public notices warning people to discontinue the consumption of this product. The costs that are required in any such campaign should be recovered from the company, because it was their responsibility. Number six, establish a compensation mechanism for those consumers whose health may have been adversely affected by consuming this product. And sixth or seventh finally, assess the health standards of the export product also. Because if the product being exported, if that has a problem, tomorrow that can cause you international embarrassment, not for this company, but for the nation as a whole. That is question number A or 11A. What action can the competent authority take? Second question over here says, what is the course of action the food company should take to resolve this crisis and to restore its reputation? Now, what the company should do is address three different stakeholders differently. Number one, the first and the most important stakeholder is the government or the competent authority. In this case, number one, cooperate with the inspections, and number two, comply with any fair penalties, fair punishment that the government enforces upon you. Second is within the company itself. Within the company, what you do? First, you should conduct an in-house investigation to find the cause of the discrepancy of the contamination. Number two, enforce accountability upon the people who've done something wrong, because of whose deliberate action of omission or commission that contamination happened. Number three, invest in better raw material, invest in better machinery, invest in better internal quality check mechanisms. Number four, revive employee confidence, because if your employees don't have confidence in what you're doing, after a certain point, maintaining the profitability and productivity of the company will be very difficult. And fifth and finally, diversify your product portfolio, diversify customer segments, so that just in case this product, whatever brand it is being sold under, just in case it cannot function well, at least you can establish a connect with the customers on the basis of other products. First, engage with the government. Second, intervention within the company. Third and most importantly, whose trust have you lost? You have lost the trust of your customers. So third, the company should address the customers. How? Handle the crisis proactively and take responsibility for what has happened. Don't lie. Don't try to cover up. Cover it up, take responsibility for what has happened. Number two, maintain channels of communication with all stakeholders. Do not stay silent, because the more you stay silent, the more that silence will fuel negative speculation. Even if there is something not wrong, the wrongdoings will be further exaggerated. Number three, a renewed advertising campaign, and portray the incident not as a breach of trust. Don't portray that incident as a breach of trust or as a deliberate wrongdoing. Portray it as a lapse, as an act of omission rather than commission. Number four, increase the presence on social media, encourage customers to share their feedback, build, develop, and leverage on the emotional equity that you have with your customers. And in doing this, take these actions to regain and to redevelop trust amongst the customers. Third and finally, very simple question over here, which says, what is the ethical dilemma involved in this case? Ethical dilemma is easy to identify. On the one hand is the profitability, if you continue with that kind of a substandard product. On the other hand is customer welfare. And here, what should the company keep in mind? That short-term economic gains, short-term economic benefits can lead to long-term loss of customer value, of customer trust, of market share, of sales, of even profitability. For short-term benefits, you cannot sacrifice so much in the long term. Number two, that rebuilding the brand image will increase costs in the present, but in the long term, it will lead to sustained benefits. And in the short term, therefore, even if the costs are increasing, you can easily finance them from the existing pool of profits. You earn substantial profits, you significantly increase your market share. From that pool of profits, these costs can be financed. So don't worry about the short-term costs, you focus on the long-term gains. And number three, that taking responsibility for the lapse indicates commitment to consumer welfare and establishes an emotional connect with your customers. So again, what is the ethical dilemma? And along with that, out of these 3 points, one or two of them very briefly mentioned over here.
And now we will take up this case study number 12. Now the case study number 12 says, Pawan is working in state government for 10 years. He has joined new office along with 5 other colleagues. Pawan got to know that his senior officer was a difficult and insensitive person with problems in his personal life. After some satisfactory initial period, the senior of Pawan started belittling him for no rhyme or reason. He showed Pawan in bad light, highlighting his shortcomings publicly. This resulted in Pawan losing confidence. His relation with his senior officer turned out to be toxic. This not only caused him mental torture and affected his physical health, but also adversely affected his personal and family life. His wife also became the victim of his negativity, and due to the harassment suffered in office, happiness vanished from his life. Now the question number 12 asked you that what are the options available with Pawan to cope up with the situation. Second, what approach Pawan should adopt for bringing peace, tranquility and congenial environment in the office and home. Third, as an outsider, what are the suggestions for the boss and the subordinate? And number 4, what type of training at various levels in government offices, what type of training would you suggest at various levels in the government offices? Now this is the way the questions were framed. Now what are the options available here? Of course, there are many options available. One of the option is that Pawan continues to suffer in silence, which will take a heavy toll on his personal and professional life. The second is to seek transfer and avoid confrontation. The third is to confront the bully officer by asserting the correctness of his stand and the work done by him. The fourth is, of course, to seek an appointment by the bullying boss and apprise him about how his behavior has undermined his morale as well as morale of his colleagues and is adversely affecting the work of the department. And in the event of boss, the next point, in the event of boss not refusing to see the reason and change his behavior, Pawan can bring the matter to the notice of higher authorities and seek redressal of his genuine grievances. Now, the second question here is that what are the measures that Pawan can take to bring peace to office as well as home? So one of the measures which Pawan can seek is to speak to his co-workers and jointly put pressure on boss, who is a bully, to seek psychiatric intervention. Now the second thing is that Pawan, if the need be, should meet the aggression of the boss by counter assertion and clearly communicate to boss how his actions are causing distress to all the people in the office associated with him. The third is Pawan should learn not to take the remarks of the bullying officer very personally. The fourth effort towards assuring peace that Pawan can adopt is to take his wife into confidence, discuss the matter with her, inform her about the reasons behind his emotional outbursts, and request her to be more empathetic and supportive during these trying and testing times. And also what Pawan can do is, as and when the bullying boss adopts some semblance of normality and behaves in a proper manner, the boss can be praised for his behavior. This will be a kind of positive reinforcement for the boss to continue with his desirable behavior. And Pawan can also be an ideal role model himself, who displays all those behaviors that he wants others, particularly his bullying boss, to display. This way, there is a possibility that boss may emulate some of the desirable behaviors shown by Pawan. Now the next part of the question is, as an outsider, what do you suggest? As an outsider, what do you suggest that how boss and subordinate can overcome this situation? So as an outsider, I would suggest first that there can be a provision for psychological counseling for all the personnel in the organization. Number two, we can put better personnel selection and training mechanisms in place so that similar kind of situations do not arise in future. The third important thing is that family members of the boss can be encouraged to be the part of rehabilitation exercise of boss. The boss who is a bully can be encouraged to take professional help to address his insecurities that are the source of distress to all. And also it is important that there is a need to create in the organization more effective grievance redressal systems so that such behaviors can be avoided in future. Also important is some kind of an awareness building program at all levels so that more realistic expectations can be set by people for themselves. Now the last part of the question is, what type of training would you suggest at various levels of government officers? So well, at all levels there can be various training programs that can be put in place in order to address this problem. One is the sensitivity training. Now the sensitivity training allows the individual to understand what is the implication of his behavior on others, and this way individual, by understanding how his behavior causes distress to others, may make efforts to improve his behavior. The second is role internalization training, so that people understand that what are the roles that they need to adopt and what are the right ways of playing these roles. The third is some kind of stress management programs like yoga, meditation, etc., which can help people relax better. Then there can also be some kind of goal setting training so that realistic goals are set, and more often than not these goals are achieved. Any achievement of goal always increases the team spirit and as well as strengthens team building. And then there can be training in positive self-talk and use of positive imagery to motivate oneself and keep oneself in high spirits. And then there can always be a provision of some kind of re-attribution training. Attribution is the process of judging the motives of others, and many times there are errors in attribution which often result in miscommunication between the people, which often results in some kind of tension in relationships. So re-attribution training will make people correct their faulty attributional patterns, and this can go a long way in creating a healthy and congenial environment. Thank you.